Hello, welcome back. I hope you're doing very well. In this video, we're going to take a look at Korg Gadget, which is a groovebox app for iOS, which I think is probably the best £20 you could spend if you have a Force and an iOS device. It's a very comprehensive groovebox and it's modular. And by that, I mean it has lots of different modules you can put together. You don't need virtual patch cables and all that stuff. I like it for three reasons really. The first is it sounds brilliant. The second is its MIDI implementation is really good, which makes it a great sound module for the Force. And the third is it's self-contained. It has all of its modules, effects, and mixer in one place, so you don't have to mess about hosting loads of different things in AUM. So what I'm going to do is show you how it works and how to use it with the Force. So let's get on with it. Okay, before we can do anything with Gadget, we obviously need to connect the iPad and the Force together so that MIDI and audio can flow between the two of them. This is an iPad Pro, which only has a single USB-C connector. So I've got this kind of dongle thing attached to it, which has USB-A sockets on it and also a headphone jack as well, which is here. So I've got a line out cable going from the headphone straight into the standard audio inputs, just as you would do with anything. And then for the MIDI side of things, I'm using this, which is an iRig MIDI 2, which is basically a 5-pin MIDI to USB MIDI adapter. The 5-pin end goes to the Force, and then there's a USB cable going to the dongle in the iPad. Now, you can set this up using Bluetooth MIDI between the iPad and the Force. I tested it and it does work. However, I found that there was just enough latency for it to be irritating, so I can't really recommend that. But the iRig works brilliantly, and there are obviously other dongles as well. But the sum of that is you'll need to get audio out of your iPad into the audio inputs of your Force, and you'll need some kind of MIDI connector. I really recommend the iRig 2. I'm not sponsored to say that, I bought it, but it just works flawlessly. So once we've done that, we open up Gadget, and when you open a blank kind of project in Gadget, this is what you see, nothing going on whatsoever. Before we do anything, we need to tell Gadget how to respond to MIDI from the Force, and we do that by tapping this little cog icon, and we'll see a bunch of options come up here. On MIDI input, there are two options, easy and advanced. It defaults to easy. Now, easy is like an omni mode, so basically any MIDI coming into to Gadget will be routed to the active track, which we'll get onto in a second. So we don't want that. We want to be able to send individual MIDI channels to individual tracks. So we tap on advanced. And then there's MIDI sync, which has internal, external, and auto. Even though we're not going to use the sequencer built into Gadget, we still want external MIDI sync for the simple reason that if you use delay effects or modulation effects in Gadget, they will be synced to the project tempo. That's all we need to do in there, so that's finished now. So at the top bit of Gadget, there's nothing showing at the moment, but this is where the sequencer lives, and it works in exactly the same way as Force does. You have tracks going from left to right, then you have clips going downwards, and scenes are collections of clips, just the same way as the Force. However, we're going to use the Force to sequence this, so we're not going to mess around with that. So the first thing we need to do is add a track, which is the same thing as adding an instrument, basically. And we do that with this little plus icon at the bottom. And now you start to see why Gadget is so great. It comes with an absolute stack of these modules, or gadgets as they're called in here, and there is a massive variety. There are monosynths and polysynths, both sort of kind of virtual analog, and also wavetable synths, PCM synths. They're all kind of aimed or tailored for particular sorts of sounds. So we have things here that are designed for. See, this one here is an ambient synthesizer. It's great for kind of ethereal evolving pads. There's also a bunch of drum machines in here as well. It's just brilliant. There's the wavetable synthesizer, which comes from the their other groovebox app, which the name of which escapes me. It's a brilliant wavetable synth. There's a ton of great stuff in here. We're going to start off really simple, and we're just going to pick the tube bass module. So if we tap that now, it brings up the UI, and you'll see we've got a little keyboard we can play with here. But obviously what we need to do is tell tell Gadget that to expect MIDI from the Force. So to do that, we expand the bottom view with this little arrow key here, and we now see this is where our mixer will be when we've got some tracks in. And this is slightly unintuitive. It's the only thing that is on Gadget. This all button here is actually the MIDI control. So if we tap it, we can see that it's currently taking all ins and all channels. Now what we're going to do is set up a MIDI track in here, and we're going to set it to MIDI channel 1. So we tap on all ins, and we now see we've got a load of options, and iRig MIDI 2 is the one we want to use because that's my adapter. We go back to channels, and we're going to set that up on channel 1. So we now have our bass synth sitting on first track on MIDI channel 1. So we go to the Force, and we add a track, and we add a MIDI track, and now we just need to change a couple of things. On the MIDI output, we turn this to it says Force, which means it's using Force's internal output, and this is our MIDI channel, and we're already on channel 1. So if we go to note mode, which we're in now, we should hear something when we play, and we do, which is brilliant. Now it's making wobbly weird noises because the arpeggiator is switched on this patch, which we don't want. So once you're in, you've got your track set up, each of these modules, and you saw how many of them there were, they also have a ton of presets as well. They have 2 factory banks of presets, so on and so forth. Let's just pick a, looking for a, there we go. So here we go, we've got a nice sort of sensible bass sound here. Now, one of the things I love about Gadget is just how easy it is to configure the MIDI on it. So basically, if we open the UI for the synth, and we tap this function button here, we see a bunch of stuff comes up. This is all related to the sequencer, which we're not going to mess about with. But here, pleasingly, it gives us a really easy way to see what the CC values are for all of the parameters on the synth. And this is the same for all of the modules. So we can see here, a VCF cutoff is CC number 74. Now, on the Force, there's a little bit of a hack for you, or not a hack, a tip here. If we go to macros and go to project 2, which is our empty macros slot, and tap the knob above our track we're working on, if we tap add, we go to track. Because we're on a MIDI track, it automatically assumes that you want to add a CC value to it. So if we go down, these are kind of pre-mapped ones. It assumes that these are what the synth is going to expect. But our VCF cutoff is 74. So if we go down to 74 and click on that, if we close that function page, you'll see that it's mapped the knob to our cutoff. Now this is brilliant because obviously if you're performing and you were using the Gadget as a module, you would want to be able to control various different parameters on the synths. But also when you're recording into the Forces sequencer, you can automate these changes as well, which is absolutely brilliant. So if we go back to the main menu, what we're going to do this time is pick a drum machine. I'm going to just show you how that works. So if we scroll down, we've got a little drum machine here. Again, it's got an absolute ton of kits, and there's several drum machines in here. If we go back to matrix mode, one of the quirks of the Force is to control this drum machine, we obviously need a MIDI track. So we tap MIDI track, and this time we're going to go for Force output, and then this time channel 2. And we do the same thing here. We go to our iRig, and this time we set it on channel 2. And now we can play the drums. Now, because this is a because the Force defaults to this being a keyboard or melodic play mode, this works perfectly fine if you're in kind of chromatic C major mode. However, if you happen to have the Force set up in a scale like C minor or something, you obviously lose some of these notes, so the drum machine won't play. So I'm just going to show you a little trick of how to get around that problem. So if you'll see here, our drum machine is sitting on MIDI 002. In fact, let's just change that and call it drum so we know. There we go. If we create a drum track just like we would do normally, we now get our drum pads as we would expect to. But then if we go to send to on our MIDI section and we send the MIDI to drum, the Force forwards our drum notes to the drum track we just created, which means that it will always play all of the drums regardless of if you have the keypad in a scale or note mode. So this obviously works with Gadget, but this is a little kind of hack to get around things if you're using any sort of external drum machine with the Force and you want to have your keypad in some kind of scale mode. So that's basically how you set it up. So what I'm going to do now is I'll just come off screen and come back again. I've set up a little project with a proper track in it, so I'll just cue that up now, and then we can have a look at how the effects work and how it all works together. So I'll be right back. Okay, I'm back. As you can see here, I've got a project set up in Gadget. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 tracks, which are these 6 tracks, MIDI tracks in the Force. And I've created just a little arrangement of clips as you would do normally. Now all the sounds you're going to hear are coming from Gadget. The Force is purely sequencing. There's nothing happening from the Force at all. So if we look at these kind of these are almost like channel strips really for each of the tracks. You can see you've got solo and mute, which we don't want to mess around with. We've got our MIDI controls, which we looked at in the previous section. But this IFX button here is insert effects. So you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 insert effects slots. And if you tap on this, you can see no effect, compressor, sidechain, EQ, filter, auto wah, phaser, blah, blah, blah. There's a ton of them. It's a really, and sidechain, which is obviously important. It works kind of like Mother Ducker does on the Force. So you've got loads of tone shaping effect opportunities here. You've got that for each of the tracks, and then we have a master channel which can have reverb on it as well. You've got pan controls and level controls for each of the tracks. The drum machines have per sound or per drum panning and level controls as well. It's incredibly comprehensive. It works brilliantly. So what I've done here is I've just created a little arrangement using these things, and just to show you that the sequencing works flawlessly. So these are our MIDI tracks being triggered by the Force. So we've got our first 3 instruments here. Let's just set our launch quantize. So we could in real time tweak our levels if we want to. Our mutes work just like they would do if we were sequencing internal sounds. Some acid going on here. And as you can hear, I think it sounds absolutely brilliant. All of the modules, oops, sorry, let's kill that. All of the modules within Gadget sound brilliant, and there are absolutely tons of them. There are interesting little drum machines, like where's this one here? Tokyo is a really interesting. Oh, I can't play it because I haven't got the track set out for it. There are some really interesting synths in here. It's brilliant as a sound module for using as we've just done it here. It's also brilliant as a source of samples as well. The thing I absolutely love about it is obviously the Force is not very portable, but you can take your iPad or your iPhone on the train, and you can sit and do sound design with your headphones on while you've got some downtime on public transport, You can use the sequencer as well to write little parts and then just translate everything over to the Force if you want. I genuinely think this is the best 20 quid you can spend if you've got an iPad and a Force. And the price goes down occasionally as well because they do special offers. Since I've had this a couple of years. Korg have also done drops where they've introduced new modules to work inside Gadget, which is brilliant. They seem to be supporting it very well, and it's utterly stable. I've never had any issues with it. As you heard here, we've got, let's get rid of that. We've got 6 gadgets playing at the same time. Now this is an iPad Pro, one of the quite new M1 models, so it's quite powerful. I've never had any CPU issues with this model. I had Gadget running on one of the quite old iPads that still had the headphone adapter to it. I can't remember which model it was. Significantly less powerful, and it still ran everything perfectly. I regularly had 6 or 7 tracks running with no issues. So all of that combined, the way it sounds, the portability, the flexibility, the fact it's all contained, you can save a project like this, close it and open it again and it will all be there. You don't have to save lots of different things and save different patches as you would do if you're using standalone synths within AUM. It's completely stable. It's just brilliant. So I think it's well worth checking out if you have a few quid in your pocket, you have an iOS device and you'd like a sound source or a sound module for the Force. Anyway, thanks for watching. I hope that was useful and I'll see you soon. Bye bye.